The city lights blurred together below the rooftop railing, but Laura Bennett was not looking at the view. She was looking at the boarding pass folded into a small square inside her coat pocket, at the clock on her phone, which read 11:40, and at Ethan Cole, who stood across the room with a drink he had not touched in 20 minutes. Tomorrow morning at 7:15, she would board a plane to Singapore. The job offer had come 3 weeks ago, and she had said yes before she let herself think too hard about what she would be leaving behind. Tonight was supposed to be a simple goodbye party. 40 people, a rooftop bar, a banner that read, "We'll miss you, Laura," in gold letters that someone had clearly bought in a hurry. It should have felt like an ending. Instead, it felt like the loudest silence she had ever stood inside. Megan Pierce found her first, 2 glasses of champagne balanced carefully in her hands. She pushed one into Laura's grip without asking if she wanted it. "You've been staring at him for 10 minutes, Megan said. "I counted." "I have not." "You have, and he's been staring back every time you look away. It's like watching 2 people play chess with their eyes." Laura took a long sip instead of answering. Across the rooftop, Ethan laughed at something Noah Carter said, but his eyes drifted back to her, before the laugh had even finished, the way they always did, the way they had been doing for 2 years, ever since the night they stayed up until 4 in the morning, arguing about whether a building could have a personality, and somehow ended up agreeing on everything that mattered, and nothing that didn't. "You're leaving tomorrow," Megan said, quieter now. "If you don't say something tonight, you're going to spend the next 2 years in Singapore, wondering what would have happened if you had." "There's nothing to say. Laura, there's a job, there's a flight. There's a life that starts in 14 hours that doesn't have room in it for wondering about Ethan Cole." Megan gave her a look that said she did not believe a single word of that sentence, and honestly, neither did Laura. The truth was simpler and harder than she wanted it to be. 2 years of late dinners that turned into late nights. 2 years of him remembering the smallest things she said in passing, the name of her childhood dog, the way she took her coffee when she was stressed, the fact that she hated the color yellow because of a dress she wore to a funeral when she was 9. 2 years of almost holding hands at a crosswalk, almost kissing at a New Year's party when the countdown hit 0 and everyone around them turned to someone else, almost saying it 100 times, in 100 different ways, and always pulling back at the last second because saying it meant risking the only friendship that had ever made sense to her. Now she had 14 hours left, and the almosts had run out of road. Daniel Hart, who had organized the party and was 3 drinks deep into a night he clearly intended to remember forever, climbed onto a low step near the bar and tapped a fork against his glass until the rooftop quieted down. "I'm not good at speeches," he announced, which earned a laugh from most of the room. "But I've known Laura since college, and I want to say one true thing about her before she disappears to the other side of the planet. She notices people, not in the way most of us notice people, where you remember their name and maybe what they do for work. She notices the things underneath that. She'll remember the exact day your dad got sick, the thing you said you wanted to do before you turned 30, the joke you made once that you forgot you even told. She makes people feel seen, and Singapore has no idea how lucky it's about to get." The room applauded, glasses lifted, and Laura felt her face go warm, partly from the compliment and partly because, across the rooftop, Ethan was the only one not clapping. He was watching her, his glass still untouched, his expression unreadable in a way that made her stomach drop and lift at the same time. Henry Voss, her boss for the past 3 years, came over to say his own version of goodbye, full of compliments about her work and promises to call if Singapore ever needed someone to fly back for a project. Laura smiled and thanked him and barely heard a word, because over his shoulder, Ethan had started walking toward her, weaving between the small clusters of people with the unhurried walk of someone who had nowhere else he wanted to be. Henry excused himself at exactly the wrong moment, or exactly the right one, depending on how Laura chose to look at it. And then it was just the 2 of them, standing near the railing with the city spread out behind them like something neither of them had the courage to look at directly. "Hey," Ethan said. "Hey yourself. You look like someone who's about to get on a plane and never come back. That's not the plan. I know. I'm just saying you look like it." Laura turned the champagne glass slowly in her hand, watching the bubbles climb and disappear. "Are you going to make this weird?" "I'm trying very hard not to." "How's that working out?" "Badly," Ethan admitted, and there was something underneath the joke, something tired and honest that made Laura's chest tighten in a way she had spent 2 years pretending not to notice. I keep thinking about all the things I never said to you, and I keep running out of time to say them. You have all night. Do I? The question hung there between them, simple on the surface and loaded underneath, and Laura understood, the way she always understood the things Ethan didn't say out loud, that he wasn't asking about the party. He was asking about something bigger, something neither of them had ever had the nerve to name directly. A woman near the bar laughed loudly at something, and Ethan's shoulders tensed for half a second, before he relaxed again, glancing over his shoulder out of pure habit. Laura followed his gaze but saw nothing unusual, just strangers and friends mixing together under string lights. She filed the small reaction away without understanding it, the way you notice a single odd note in a song you otherwise know by heart. Who were you looking for? She asked. No one, he said too quickly. Just thought I heard someone. Noah called his name from across the rooftop, something about a toast he was supposed to help with, and the moment cracked open just enough for Ethan to step back, the spell broken by ordinary noise. Don't leave before I get to talk to you properly, he said. Promise me. I promise. He disappeared into the crowd, and Laura stood at the railing alone, her heart doing something complicated and unfamiliar in her chest. Megan reappeared at her side a moment later, watching the space where Ethan had been standing, with the satisfied expression of someone who had just watched a slow and inevitable disaster begin to unfold, exactly the way she had predicted it would. He's going to say something tonight, Megan said. I can feel it. Or I am. Either way, somebody better. Because in 14 hours you're going to be on a plane, and the next time you see him, 2 years could have passed, and you'll spend every flight home wondering what would have happened if you had just opened your mouth tonight. Laura looked out at the city, at the 1,000 small lights that made up 1,000 small lives she would never know anything about, and she made a decision the way people make decisions when they have run completely out of time to make a careful one. She was not going to leave this party without telling Ethan Cole exactly how she felt, not a version softened by jokes, not a version disguised as friendship, the real thing, tonight. What changed? Megan asked, watching her face. You've had 2 years to say something. Why tonight? Because tonight is the only night I have left where I still get to be a coward and change my mind tomorrow. After tomorrow, there's an ocean between us, and cowardice turns into something permanent. Megan squeezed her arm and said nothing else, which was, for Megan, the kindest thing she could possibly do. Across the rooftop, Noah pulled Ethan aside near the drinks table, away from the noise, and Laura watched the two of them speak in low voices, their heads bent close together. Noah said something short, his face serious in a way that did not match the lightness of the party, and Ethan's jaw tightened. He shook his head once, firm, like he was refusing something, and Noah held up both hands as if to say he had only delivered a message, nothing more. Whatever it was passed between them quickly, and then Ethan straightened his shoulders, fixed his expression back into something easier, and turned to rejoin the party as if nothing had happened at all. Laura wanted to ask Megan if she had seen it too, but Megan was already deep in conversation with one of the catering staff about leftover food, and the moment slipped past unspoken. It was a small thing, the kind of thing a person could decide not to think about. But Laura had spent 2 years learning the shape of Ethan's moods, and this one did not belong to the night they were having. It belonged to something else, something he was carrying quietly underneath the jokes and the lingering looks, and she found herself wondering, for the first time all evening, whether the thing keeping him from saying what he clearly wanted to say had nothing to do with her at all. She pushed the thought aside. There would be time to ask him later, once the party thinned out, once they finally had 5 honest minutes without an audience. For now, there was only the rooftop, the string lights swaying faintly in a wind that smelled like rain coming in off the coast, and the steady, building certainty that tonight, one way or another, the silence between them was finally going to break. The party went on around her, full of music and laughter and people offering their goodbyes in 2s and 3s. Laura barely registered any of it. Her eyes kept finding Ethan across the room, and every time they did, he was already looking back, and the 2 years of almost had narrowed down to something that felt, finally, unbearably close. She thought about the dress she had packed that morning, the apartment she had already half emptied, the boxes waiting at her parents' house, and none of it felt as urgent as the few feet of rooftop still standing between her and the truth. She did not know yet that the night had other plans. She did not know that the conversation she had been rehearsing in her head for 2 years would not happen the way she imagined it, that a storm rolling in from the coast and a phone call neither of them expected would turn one simple confession into something far more dangerous than either of them was prepared for. All she knew, standing at the railing with the city humming below her and 14 hours left on the clock, was that tonight, finally, she was going to tell him. She just did not know yet what it would cost her to hear his answer. The party began to thin out a little after midnight. Guests drifted toward the elevator in pairs, hugging Laura on their way out, promising to video call once she landed, pressing small gifts into her hands that she would not have room for in her suitcase but would carry anyway, because throwing them away felt like throwing away the people who gave them. Daniel fell asleep sitting upright on a bar stool. Henry left early, citing an early meeting that everyone knew was an excuse to give the younger crowd room to say their real goodbyes without their boss watching. By the time the rooftop had emptied to a dozen people, the sky had changed. A wind picked up off the water, carrying the smell of rain before the first drop fell, and the string lights swayed hard enough that the bartender started packing glasses away early, muttering about a storm warning he had seen on his phone. "I'll walk you home," Ethan said, appearing at Laura's elbow as she gathered her coat. "It's on the way. Your apartment is in the opposite direction." "I know." She did not argue. She had been waiting all night for exactly this, the two of them peeling away from the group, the noise falling behind them, the city narrowing down to the width of a sidewalk, and the sound of their own footsteps. Megan caught her eye from across the rooftop and mouthed something that might have been good luck, or might have been finally, and then Laura and Ethan were in the elevator, and then they were outside, and the first fat drops of rain were already landing on the pavement around them. "We should run," Ethan said. "In these shoes, running means falling. I'd rather get wet." He laughed. And for a moment it was easy again, the way it always was between them. Two people who had spent 2 years finding each other funny, in exactly the right places. They walked close together under a borrowed umbrella that Daniel had pushed into Ethan's hands at the door, the rain picking up around them in long gray sheets that turned the streetlights into smeared halos. "Remember the night you stayed at my place when I had pneumonia?" Laura asked, mostly to fill the silence, mostly because she did not yet have the courage to say the things she had promised herself she would say. "You made soup that tasted like nothing, and you sat on my floor for 6 hours because you didn't trust me to take my medicine on my own." "You weren't taking your medicine on your own. I checked the bottle. You'd skipped 2 doses. I was busy being sick. That's what the medicine was for." She smiled into the rain, and Ethan looked at her sideways with an expression she had seen before but never quite been able to name. Something between fondness and ache, like he was looking at something he was already missing even though she had not left yet. His phone buzzed inside his jacket. He glanced down out of habit, and Laura watched his face change before he turned the screen away from her. A small, automatic motion, the kind of thing a person does without deciding to do it. The name on the screen had flashed for less than a second, but she had caught it anyway. Claire. She did not ask. There was a version of tonight where she would have, where curiosity would have won out over the careful balance they had built, but tonight had only one conversation in it that mattered, and she was not going to let Claire, whoever Claire currently was to him, take up space that belonged to the thing she had promised herself she would say. Ethan silenced the call without answering it and slid the phone back into his pocket, his jaw tight, in the same way it had been tight earlier on the rooftop when Noah pulled him aside. He did not explain, and Laura did not ask, and they kept walking, the silence between them suddenly carrying a different weight than it had a moment ago. The rain grew heavier. They cut through a narrow side street to escape the worst of it, ducking under the stone awning of an old building that had been a bank once and was now boarded up and waiting for someone to decide what it should become next. The street outside ran with water, headlights smearing past in the dark, the storm pressing close enough that they could feel the temperature drop with every gust. "We should wait it out here," Ethan said. 5 minutes. "It'll pass." 5 minutes, Laura agreed, though she already knew, standing in the dim light with the rain hammering down a few feet away, that 5 minutes was either far too short or far too long for what she was about to do. Ethan shook the umbrella out and folded it, propping it against the wall, and for a moment they simply stood there, watching the water run in sheets off the awning above them, the city reduced to a blur of taillights and reflected neon through the rain. "Do you remember the community center project?" he asked suddenly, The one where I couldn't get the roofline to work for 3 straight weeks. And you came into the office at 10 at night, because I texted you a photo of my sketch, and you said, and I quote, "This looks like a building having a bad day." It did look like a building having a bad day. You stayed until 2 in the morning helping me fix it. You didn't have to do that. I wanted to. You always want to. That's the thing about you, Laura. You show up for people without being asked, and you never once made it feel like a favor. He looked down at his shoes, water pooling around them on the stone step. I used to think I had time to figure out how to say what I wanted to say to you. I kept telling myself there would be a better moment, a calmer one that didn't have a flight attached to it. I was wrong. There was never going to be a calm moment. I just used calm as an excuse to stay quiet. Laura's pulse climbed. This was as close as he had ever come, in 2 years, to saying it first. And some old, careful part of her wanted to let him finish, to see where his own courage would take him if she simply waited. But the rain was already slowing, and the 5 minutes were already half gone, and she had promised herself on the rooftop that she would not let this night end with both of them too afraid to go first. "Laura, don't," she said. "Let me go first. If I don't say it now, I'm going to talk myself out of it on the plane tomorrow, and I'm going to spend the entire flight to Singapore hating myself for it. And that's not how I want to start a new job in a new country, so let me go first." He nodded once, his eyes steady on her in the half-dark, the rain a constant roar behind him. "I have loved you for 2 years," Laura said, and the words came out steadier than she expected, like she had been carrying them so long they had worn smooth, like river stones. Not the friend kind, not the maybe someday kind, the real kind, the kind that made every other person I dated feel like a placeholder, the kind that made me memorize the sound of your laugh because some stupid part of me thought I might need to remember it one day. I have loved you since the night we argued about buildings having personalities, and I never said anything because saying it meant risking losing you completely, and you were worth more to me as a friend than nobody at all. But I'm getting on a plane in 7 hours, and I am done being careful. So I'm asking you, tonight, right now, with no excuse left to hide behind, can you refuse me? The rain kept falling. A car passed on the flooded street, its headlights sweeping briefly across Ethan's face, illuminating an expression that was not refusal and was not acceptance. Something caught painfully between the two, his mouth opening slightly, as if the beginning of a word had formed and then lost its nerve halfway to becoming sound. He said nothing. Laura had imagined this moment 100 different ways over 2 years, and in every version, even the bad ones, even the ones where he said no, there had been words, a gentle rejection, a panicked confession of his own, anything. She had not imagined this, the silence stretching long enough to become its own kind of answer, his eyes locked on hers with something that looked almost like grief, his hands flexing at his sides like he wanted to reach for her and could not let himself. "Ethan." He stopped, started again, stopped. His phone buzzed a second time, and this time he did not check it, but the sound seemed to land on him like a physical weight, his shoulders dropping slightly, his eyes flicking toward his pocket and away again, and Laura understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water down her spine, that whatever was happening in his silence had very little to do with whether he loved her and everything to do with something else entirely, something he was not ready to say, something with a name that had just buzzed against his leg for the second time in 10 minutes. "Say something," she said, and her voice cracked on the second word in a way she hated. "Anything. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me it's complicated. Tell me you need time. Just don't stand there and say nothing, because the nothing is so much worse than any answer you could give me." The silence held. Somewhere behind the roar of the storm, thunder rolled low across the city, and the rain began to slow into something more like mist, the worst of the squall pushing past them toward the harbor. Laura felt something break loose inside her chest, not the gentle kind of heartbreak she had braced herself for, but something sharper, something that tasted like anger riding on top of humiliation, the particular sting of having handed someone the most honest thing you had, and watching them simply fail to catch it. "Forget it," she said, stepping out from under the awning before he could stop her. "Forget I said anything. I have a flight in 7 hours. Laura, wait." She did not wait. She walked into the rain, which had softened but not stopped, her shoes already ruined, her coat already soaked through, and she did not look back to see whether he followed. because looking back felt like giving him one more chance to say something, and she had decided, in the space of about 4 seconds, that she was done offering chances that did not get taken. The street ahead of her ran downhill toward the avenue, slick with rainwater and reflected light, and she crossed without checking properly, her mind 2 years and 1 confession away from paying attention to traffic, and that was the moment the headlights swung wide around the corner, too fast for the wet road, the driver's view half blinded by the rain still coming down in sheets. "Laura!" Ethan's voice cut through the storm a half-second before his hand closed around her arm, yanking her backward hard enough that she stumbled into his chest, her heart slamming against her ribs as the car fishtailed past, horn blaring, close enough that she felt the spray of water it threw up against her legs. For a moment neither of them moved. His arms were locked around her face pressed against his soaked shirt, both of them breathing too fast, the city blurring and steadying around them in slow motion. "You weren't looking," he said into her hair, his voice rough in a way she had never heard before. "You weren't even looking. I was a little distracted." It was meant to come out lighter than it landed. Neither of them laughed. He pulled back just far enough to look at her, his hands still gripping her arms like he was not yet convinced the danger had fully passed. And for one suspended second, Laura thought, finally, that he was going to say it, whatever it was. The word she had been waiting 2 years to hear. The answer to the question still hanging unanswered in the wet air between them. His phone buzzed a 3rd time. This time he checked it. He could not seem to stop himself, his hand moving toward his pocket almost against his own will, and when he saw whatever was on the screen, the color drained slightly from his face, and the moment that had almost become something closed back over like water after a stone. "I have to take this," he said quietly. "Ethan, I have to take this, Laura. I'm sorry. I'll explain everything, I promise. Just give me a minute." He stepped a few feet away, the phone already at his ear, his back half turned toward her, and Laura stood alone on the wet sidewalk with her heart still racing from the near miss, and her question still hanging unanswered in the air, and she understood, watching the tight, careful way he spoke into the phone, low enough that she could not make out the words, that whatever was happening on the other end of that call was about to change everything she thought she understood about tonight. She did not wait to find out. She turned and walked the rest of the way home alone, the rain settling into a thin, steady drizzle around her, her confession still sitting unanswered somewhere behind her in the dark. The streets were nearly empty this late, the storm having chased away even the late-night crowd, and Laura walked with her arms wrapped around herself, replaying the last 20 minutes over and over, trying to find the exact second where everything had gone sideways. It was not the silence itself that hurt the most. She had braced herself for silence, for hesitation, even for an honest no. What she had not braced herself for was watching him choose a phone call over her, watching the careful, practiced control slide back over his face, the moment his pocket buzzed. Like 2 years of almost had been waiting this whole time for an excuse to remain almost forever. Her phone buzzed once as she reached her building, and for a foolish half-second her heart leapt, certain it was him. It was Megan instead. How did it go? Tell me everything. Laura looked at the message for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the screen, rain dripping steadily from the ends of her hair onto the glass. She typed 3 different replies and deleted all 3. Before finally settling on the truth, stripped down to its smallest, most honest shape. "I told him." He said nothing. Then he got a phone call and walked away. The reply came back almost instantly. "Wait, what phone call? From who?" Laura did not answer. She let the phone go dark in her pocket and climbed the stairs to her apartment, where half-packed boxes sat in neat, labeled rows along the wall, where a single suitcase lay open on her bed waiting to be filled with whatever she had not yet decided to leave behind. She peeled off her ruined coat and let it drop to the floor, and for a long time she simply sat on the edge of her bed in the dark, listening to the last of the storm move out over the water, wondering whether 7 hours was enough time to decide how much of tonight she was going to let herself feel, before the flight made the decision for her anyway. She did not yet know that he stood on that street corner for almost 20 minutes after she left, the phone pressed to his ear, his free hand pressed flat against his eyes, saying almost nothing while a voice on the other end said a great deal, and that by the time he finally lowered the phone, the question Laura had asked him under the stone awning had become tangled up with another question entirely, one that had nothing to do with love, and everything to do with a promise he had made 3 years ago and never told her about. The email arrived at 6 in the morning, while Laura was still lying awake staring at the ceiling, her suitcase unzipped and half full beside the bed. The storm had done more damage than anyone expected overnight, flooding a stretch of runway at the airport and grounding flights across 3 terminals. Her flight to Singapore had been cancelled and automatically rebooked for 2 days later, same time, same gate. A small mercy disguised as an inconvenience. She read the email twice before she understood what it meant. She had 48 more hours in the city than she had planned on having, 48 hours she had not budgeted for emotionally, and somewhere underneath the irritation of delayed plans, she felt something close to relief, and she hated herself a little for feeling it. She lay there for a long while after reading it, listening to the last of the storm drain out of the sky, watching gray light creep slowly across the ceiling. 2 days, 48 hours that had not existed yesterday, and now stretched out in front of her like a second chance she had not asked for, and was not sure she wanted. Part of her wished the original flight had simply left without complication, sparing her the agony of more waiting. The rest of her, the part she trusted less and listened to more, was already counting down the hours until she might see him again. Megan showed up at 9 with coffee and a determined look on her face, the kind of look she got when she had already decided how a conversation was going to go before it started. "I heard about the flight," she said, setting the cups down on the kitchen counter among half-packed boxes. "And I heard, from approximately nobody, because you went dark on me last night, what happened on the rooftop. So I'm going to need the entire story, in order, starting from the part where you told him you loved him under an umbrella, in a thunderstorm like the lead character in a movie nobody asked for. It wasn't an umbrella. We left the umbrella under the awning. That makes it worse. You confessed your love in the open rain like someone trying to get sick on purpose." Laura told her everything. The awning, the words she had finally said out loud after 2 years of swallowing them, the silence that followed, the phone call, the near miss with the car, the second silence afterward that had somehow been worse than the first. Megan listened without interrupting, which for Megan was its own kind of alarm, and when Laura finished, she sat quietly for a long moment before she spoke again. "Claire," she said slowly, "as in, the Claire who used to come to his family things? I thought she moved across the country years ago." "I don't know. I didn't ask. I didn't want to know last night, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to know now. You have to know now. He owes you that much, at minimum." Laura did not answer. She busied herself taping shut a box of books she had already taped shut once, her hands needing something to do that was not thinking about the careful, frightened way Ethan's face had changed when the phone buzzed against his leg. "Talk to me," Megan said, more gently this time, sitting down on the edge of the bed among the half-packed boxes. "Not as the girl who's about to give you a hard time for being brave and getting nothing back for it, as your friend who's actually a little worried about you right now." "I don't know what to feel," Laura admitted. "I keep waiting for the anger to show up properly, the kind that would make this simple, and instead, I just feel embarrassed, like I handed someone the most honest version of myself I had, and he looked at it and decided a phone call was more urgent. Maybe it was an emergency. Maybe, or maybe 2 years of almost was always going to end with me standing in the rain by myself, and I was just too stubborn to see it coming." Megan reached over and squeezed her hand. "For what it's worth, I don't think a man stands frozen like that, watches a car nearly hit the woman he loves, and pulls her out of the road like his own life depends on it, unless something in him is genuinely torn apart by indecision, rather than simple indifference. Indifferent men don't look wrecked, Laura. They look bored. You said he looked wrecked. He did look wrecked. Then there's something underneath this you don't have yet. I'm not saying that to give you false hope. I'm saying it because you know him better than almost anyone alive, and your gut has never once been wrong about Ethan Cole in 2 years, even when you wished it had been." Her own phone stayed silent all morning. No message, no missed call, nothing from him at all, and the nothing felt deliberate in a way that the silence on the street corner had not. She told herself she did not care. She told herself this 12 or 13 times before lunch, which was roughly 12 or 13 times more than a person who actually did not care would ever need to. It was Noah who finally broke the quiet, not Ethan. He texted her a little after 1 in the afternoon, a message that surprised her enough that she read it 3 times before responding. "Can we talk? Not about anything bad. Nachid, Ethan. To coffee place on 5th, 20 minutes. She almost said no. Whatever Noah wanted to say felt like it belonged to Ethan's side of the story. and some proud, hurting part of her did not want to hear second-hand explanations for a silence that should have been explained in person, by the person who owed her the explanation. But curiosity, and maybe something stronger than curiosity, won out, and 20 minutes later she was sitting across from Noah Carter in a quiet cafe, 2 streets from her building, a coffee going cold in front of her that she had no intention of drinking. "I'm not here to make excuses for him," Noah said, before she had even finished sitting down. "I want to say that first, because I know how this is going to sound otherwise. Okay. Ethan had a brother. Had. Past tense. His name was Owen. He died 3 years ago. Car accident. The kind of thing that happens fast and leaves everyone behind it completely unprepared." Noah turned his own cup slowly on the table, not quite looking at her. Owen was married. To Claire. The name landed differently this time, stripped of whatever simple jealousy Laura had assumed it carried the night before. She sat very still, waiting for the rest of it. Before Owen died in the hospital, Ethan made him a promise. Owen asked him to look after Claire, to make sure she wasn't alone, and Ethan, who would have promised his brother anything in that room, said yes, without thinking about what it would actually mean to carry that promise for years afterward. At first it was simple, checking in on her, helping with the funeral, the house, all the terrible logistics of a sudden death. But grief does strange things to people who are grieving the same person from different angles, and somewhere along the way, Claire started to feel like Ethan was the only piece of Owen she had left. And I think, though he's never said this to me directly, I think Ethan started to feel guilty for being alive in a way Owen wasn't, guilty enough that he let Claire lean on him more than was probably healthy for either of them. "Are they together?" Laura asked, and her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. "No, they've never been together. But everyone around them, his parents, her family, even some of our friends, started treating it like an inevitability years ago, like Ethan marrying his dead brother's widow was some kind of tidy, respectful conclusion to a tragedy. And I think Ethan got so tired of arguing against it that he just stopped arguing. He let people believe it because correcting them felt like one more loss Claire would have to absorb, on top of everything else she'd already lost." Noah finally looked up at her. "That phone call last night, Claire told him a few weeks ago that she has feelings for him. Real ones, not the obligation kind. She's been waiting for an answer. I think that's who called him on the rooftop, and I think that's who called him again on the street." Laura sat with that for a long moment, the cafe noise fading into something distant and unimportant around her. It was not the story she had braced herself for. There was no betrayal in it, no easy villain to be angry at. Only a man caught between a promise made to a dying brother and a woman he had loved quietly for 2 years, paralyzed by the fear that choosing one would feel, to everyone watching, like abandoning the other. "Why are you telling me this instead of him?" "Because he won't. He spent 3 years protecting Claire from feeling like a burden, and somewhere in there he forgot he's allowed to protect himself too. He's going to keep standing in that silence until somebody forces the door open, and I'm tired of watching him do it." Noah pushed his chair back. "I'm not telling you what to do with this. I just think you deserve to know what you're actually up against before you decide whether it's worth fighting for." He left before she could ask anything else, and Laura sat alone with her cold coffee for a long time, turning the story over in her mind, trying to decide what to feel about a man who had let his own happiness become collateral in someone else's grief. It was an easy thing to be angry at a betrayal. Betrayal had edges. It had a clear villain and a clear wound, and you could sharpen your anger against it until it gave you something solid to hold on to. This was not that. This was a man trying, badly and for 3 straight years, to do right by a brother who could no longer tell him whether he was doing it right at all, and Laura found she did not know how to be angry at grief shaped like loyalty. She only knew that it had cost her 2 years of almost, and that the cost did not stop being real just because the reason behind it turned out to be a kind one. She thought about Owen, a man she had never met, whose absence had somehow rearranged the lives of everyone still standing around the space he used to occupy. She thought about a hospital room she would never see, a promise made in a moment too raw for anyone to weigh its long-term cost, and a brother left behind to carry it alone for years, while everyone around him quietly decided what shape his life should take. She was still sitting there 20 minutes later, lost enough in thought that she did not notice the woman who had stopped near her table until a voice spoke her name. "Laura?" She looked up into a face she had seen only in photographs, years old, from a time before Owen died, when Claire had still come to Ethan's family gatherings smiling and easy. The woman standing over her now looked older than the photographs, thinner around the eyes, dressed in the kind of plain, careful clothes of someone who had stopped paying attention to fashion a long time ago and never quite started again. "I'm sorry," Claire said. "I saw you through the window. I wasn't going to say anything, but then I thought, if I don't say something now, I'll spend the rest of the day wondering if I should have." "It's fine," Laura said, though nothing about the moment felt fine. "Do you want to sit?" Claire sat, folding her hands carefully on the table, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Two women who had never properly met, bound together by a man neither of them had managed to claim. "I know Noah just talked to you," Claire said finally. "I saw him leaving. I can imagine roughly what he said." She exhaled slowly. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know what's going on between you and Ethan. I've known for over a year, longer than he probably realizes I've known. I used to be angry about it, in a quiet, ashamed sort of way, like being angry about something that wasn't mine to be angry about in the first place." "I didn't know about you," Laura said. "Not really. Not until 20 minutes ago." "I know. That's the part that isn't fair to you." Claire looked down at her hands. "Owen used to say Ethan would run himself into the ground, trying to keep everyone else from feeling pain, even at the cost of his own. I used to think that was a compliment. Lately I've started to think it's closer to a warning." She looked up, and there was something raw and unguarded in her expression that Laura had not expected. "I told him a few weeks ago that I thought I had feelings for him. I'm not sure that was true. Exactly. I think what I actually have feelings for is the last 3 years of not being alone. And Ethan has been the person standing in that space for so long that I stopped being able to tell the difference between loving him and simply being afraid of who I'd be without him there." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I called him last night to take it back," Claire said quietly. "I told him I'd been wrong, that what I felt wasn't what I thought it was, that he didn't owe Owen this, and he definitely didn't owe me this. I told him to stop standing still on my account. I don't know if it landed. He sounded like a man being handed permission he didn't know how to use." Laura turned her cup slowly on the table, watching the small ring of liquid shift and settle. "Can I ask you something and you don't have to answer it?" "Go ahead." "Are you sure? About taking it back, I mean. Because if there's even a part of you that still wants him to choose you, I'd rather know that now than watch this fall apart in front of me later." Claire considered the question for a long moment, longer than Laura expected, and when she answered, her voice had a steadiness to it that had not been there before. "I spent 3 years mistaking comfort for love, because comfort was the only thing strong enough to survive losing Owen. Watching him last night, on the phone, hearing how much it cost him just to take my call instead of finishing whatever conversation he was having with you, I understood something I should have understood a long time ago. He has never once looked at me the way he looks at you. I used to tell myself I hadn't noticed. I had noticed. I just didn't want it to be true, because if it was true, it meant I had to grieve losing him too, on top of everything else, and I was not ready to lose one more person connected to Owen." She managed a small, tired smile. "I think I'm ready now, or close enough to ready that it doesn't matter anymore." Claire stood, smoothing her coat with both hands, composed again in the way of someone used to holding herself together in public. "For what it's worth, I hope he finds his way to saying whatever he couldn't say last night. Owen would have wanted that for him. I think I want that for him too now." She left without waiting for a response, and Laura sat alone at the small table with a cold coffee and a story that had rearranged itself twice in under an hour. The careful, righteous anger she had been nursing since the rooftop, dissolving into something messier and harder to hold. Sympathy, tangled up with hope, tangled up with the simple, exhausting fact that she still did not have her answer. Her phone buzzed on the table, and this time, finally, it was him. "Can we talk? Today, wherever you want. I owe you the whole truth, and I should have given it to you last night, instead of standing there saying nothing." Laura stared at the message for a long time before she typed her reply, her thumb hovering over the screen the same way it had the night before, except this time, when the words finally came, they came without hesitation. "The pier! 1 hour!" The pier was nearly empty by the time Laura arrived, the storm having scrubbed away most of the evening crowd, leaving only a handful of fishermen packing up their lines and a few joggers cutting wide arcs around the puddles still pooled along the boards. She stood near the railing at the far end, watching gulls wheel low over gray water, her heart doing the same nervous, repetitive arithmetic it had been doing for an hour. She had rehearsed nothing this time. After the rooftop, after the awning, after Noah's careful explanation, and Claire's startling honesty, she had decided there was nothing left to rehearse. Whatever Ethan said next, she was simply going to listen. She heard his footsteps before she saw him, unhurried at first, and then quickening as he spotted her at the railing, and when he reached her, he stopped a careful arm's length away, as if he had not yet earned the right to stand any closer. "I talked to Claire this morning," Laura said, before he could start, "and to Noah, so you can skip the part where you don't know how to begin." Something in his shoulders loosened, relief and embarrassment mixed together. "Then you already know more than I managed to say out loud last night. I know the facts. I don't know how you actually feel about any of it. Those aren't the same thing." Ethan nodded slowly and turned to face the water, his hands gripping the wet railing. "Owen asked me to look after Claire 2 days before he died. He was barely conscious. The doctors had already told us there wasn't much time left, and he kept fighting through the fog just long enough to make me promise. I would have promised him anything in that room. I think some part of me has spent 3 years afraid that if I ever stopped honoring that promise completely, it would mean I'd stopped loving my brother. Like grief only counts if it costs you something every single day." He exhaled, slow and unsteady. "My parents started treating Claire and me like an inevitability almost immediately. At the funeral even, I told myself correcting them wasn't worth the extra pain it would cause Claire, who was already drowning. So I let it sit there. This expectation nobody ever said out loud, but everybody quietly believed. And I told myself I had time to figure out how to dismantle it gently. I didn't account for the fact that gently and never end up looking exactly the same from the outside. And me? You were never a complication, Laura. You were the only honest thing in 3 years of carefully managing everyone else's grief. Every time I almost told you how I felt, I'd think about how it would look, choosing happiness while Claire was still struggling, while my parents were still grieving. Like wanting something for myself was some kind of betrayal of all of it. So I stayed quiet. I told myself silence was kindness. It wasn't kindness. It was cowardice wearing a nicer coat. Laura turned that over for a moment, watching a gull settle on a piling nearby, indifferent to the conversation reshaping the lives of the 2 people watching it. "Do you know what the strangest part of this whole day has been? Hearing your story from 3 different people before I finally heard it from you. Noah told it like a man trying to protect his friend. Claire told it like a woman finally putting something down she'd been carrying too long. And you're telling it like someone confessing to a crime he doesn't actually believe he committed, but can't quite stop apologizing for anyway. Maybe because I'm not sure yet whether I did or didn't. You didn't betray anyone, Ethan. You kept a promise to your dying brother for 3 years, even when it cost you something every single day. That's not a crime. That's just an enormous, exhausting kind of love that you never gave yourself permission to set down." She stepped closer. Close enough that the wind no longer felt like it was standing between them. "The only mistake was thinking you had to keep carrying it alone, without ever telling the person who might have helped you carry it. I didn't think I deserved help carrying it. Owen was the one who didn't get to keep living. It felt obscene to ask for anything for myself on top of that. Grief isn't a competition for who suffers the least amount of joy afterward." He almost smiled at that, something small and tired pulling at the corner of his mouth. "When did you get so wise about all of this?" "Around the time I spent an entire morning rehearsing 12 different ways to tell myself I didn't care that you hadn't texted me back." The wind picked up off the water, cold and salt-edged, and Laura watched him say the truest thing he had said in 2 years, finally, without a phone buzzing in his pocket to interrupt it. "Last night," he continued, "when you asked me that question, I wanted so badly to say no, I cannot refuse you, and mean it completely. But Claire's call landed right in the middle of the bravest thing you'd ever said to me, and some old, exhausted part of my brain just shut the door. I'm not proud of that. I've spent all day hating myself for it." "Ethan!" A scream cut across the pier, sharp and sudden, coming from somewhere near the rocks below the boardwalk, where a narrow set of stairs led down toward the water. Laura's head snapped toward the sound on instinct, and then she saw it. A small boy, no older than 7, standing on the lowest stair, where the tide had crept higher than anyone expected, his foot slipping on slick rock, his small body pitching backward into the churning gray water with a splash that seemed far too quiet for how fast everything afterward happened. "Tyler!" a woman screamed from further down the boardwalk, already running, her voice cracking apart on the single syllable. Ethan moved before Laura had fully processed what she was seeing, tearing his jacket off in one motion and throwing it aside, vaulting the low railing without hesitation, his feet finding the slick stairs in 3 fast strides before he hit the water in a clean, hard dive that sent spray arcing up against the gray evening light. Laura's heart slammed into her throat. She ran toward the railing, scanning the churning water for any sign of him, the boy's mother already at the edge of the stairs, screaming his name into the wind, 2 of the fishermen abandoning their gear and sprinting over with a coil of rope someone had the presence of mind to grab. Seconds stretched out impossibly long. The water near the rocks was rougher than it looked from above, current pulling hard against the pier's foundation, and Laura's mind raced through every terrible possibility at once, her hands gripping the railing so hard her knuckles went white, until finally, Ethan's head broke the surface 20 feet from the stairs, one arm locked tight around the boy's small chest, both of them gasping, the current still dragging at them as he kicked hard against it. "Throw the rope," Laura shouted, and one of the fishermen did, the coil unspooling fast through the air and landing close enough for Ethan to catch it one-handed, wrapping it once around his wrist before the men above hauled, all 3 of them straining against the weight of the current, dragging Ethan and the boy slowly back toward the stairs, while the mother screamed encouragement and prayers in the same breath. It took less than 2 minutes from the scream to the moment Ethan's knees finally found solid stone, but it felt to Laura like it stretched across an entire separate lifetime, one where every careful, complicated conversation about promises and grief and silence shrank down to nothing beside the simple, animal terror of watching someone she loved disappear under cold water. Ethan collapsed onto the lower stairs, coughing hard. The boy clutched against his chest, still crying but breathing, definitely breathing, his small arms locked around Ethan's neck in a grip that would not let go even after his mother reached them and pulled him into her own arms, sobbing thanks into his wet hair, over and over, words tumbling out too fast to fully form sentences. Laura reached Ethan a moment later, dropping to her knees on the wet stone beside him, her hands moving over his shoulders, his face, checking for some injury she could not name, needing simply to touch him and confirm he was solid and present and breathing. "You absolute idiot," she said, and her voice broke completely on the second word. "You didn't even think about it. You just jumped." There wasn't time to think about it. His voice was rough, water still running from his hair down the side of his face, his chest heaving. "I just moved. You could have drowned. The current. I know." He reached up and caught her hand where it rested against his jaw, holding it there, his eyes finding hers with an intensity that had nothing left in it to hide behind. "Laura, I watched that boy go under and I didn't think twice. No hesitation, no promise pulling me one way, no guilt pulling me another. I just acted, because some things don't leave room for standing still." He pulled in a shaking breath. "I don't want to stand still with you anymore either. I'm done being afraid that choosing you means betraying everyone I've spent 3 years trying to protect. So no. The answer is no. I cannot refuse you. I have never once been able to refuse you. Not for one single day of the 2 years I spent pretending otherwise." Someone nearby was already calling for paramedics, the small crowd that had gathered murmuring with relief and adrenaline, the boy's mother still clutching her son tight enough to leave marks. And in the middle of all that noise, Laura felt something inside her chest finally, fully unclench, 2 years of almost collapsing into a single, soaked, breathless yes that did not even need to be spoken out loud. A paramedic crouched beside Ethan a moment later, checking his pulse, asking him short, practical questions about how long he had been in the water, whether he had swallowed any of it, whether his chest hurt when he breathed. He answered each one with the patient irritation of a man who did not feel like the patient in this particular emergency, his eyes drifting repeatedly back to Laura the entire time, as if checking that she was still there, still real, still close enough to reach. The boy, wrapped in his own blanket a few feet away, kept glancing over at Ethan too, small and shivering, and clearly determined not to let the man who had pulled him out of the current disappear from view. And when the paramedics finally cleared Ethan to stand, the boy broke free of his mother, just long enough to wrap both arms around Ethan's legs in a fierce, wordless hug that nearly knocked him off balance. "Thank you," the boy's mother said again, her voice raw, gripping Ethan's hand in both of hers. "I don't know how to thank you for this. I don't have the words." "You don't need them," Ethan said. "Just take him home. Get him warm." She nodded, pulling her son gently back toward the waiting ambulance. and Laura watched Ethan watch them go, something settled and certain in his expression now that had not been there an hour earlier, like the closeness of losing something had burned away whatever caution still remained in him. Ethan's phone, somehow still in the pocket of the jacket he had thrown aside before diving, began ringing on the boardwalk above them, faint and insistent under the wind. Neither of them moved to answer it at first. Laura helped him to his feet, both of them shaking with cold and relief in equal measure. A stranger draping a borrowed blanket over Ethan's shoulders while paramedics arrived to check the boy and, despite his protests, check Ethan as well. It was only once the worst of the chaos had settled, once the boy had been bundled into a blanket of his own and carried off toward a waiting ambulance with his mother repeating her thanks the entire way, that Ethan finally reached for the jacket and the phone still ringing inside it. He went still the moment he saw the screen. "It's my mother," he said, and something in his voice had changed entirely from the open, certain thing it had been a moment before. He answered before Laura could ask, pressing the phone to his ear with a hand that was not entirely steady. "Mom? What's wrong?" Laura watched his face change for the third time in 2 days, the color draining from it in a slow, sickening wave, his free hand coming up to press against his eyes, the same way it had on the street corner the night before, except this time, there was no pretending it was nothing. "How bad?" he asked. A pause. "I'm coming. Right now. Tell them I'm coming." He lowered the phone slowly, his eyes finding Laura's across the wet boardwalk, the blanket still draped over his shaking shoulders, the adrenaline of the rescue draining out of him and leaving something hollow and frightened in its place. "It's my father," he said. "He collapsed an hour ago. They think it's his heart. They're at the hospital now, and they don't know yet how serious it is." The two of them stood there for a long moment, soaked and shaking, the answer she had waited 2 years to hear still hanging warm and new in the air between them, already being pulled, impossibly, toward one more crisis neither of them had seen coming. "Go," Laura said. "I'll come with you. Your flight is in less than 15 hours. Your father is in a hospital right now. Go, Ethan. We'll figure out the rest of it together." He took her hand, and they ran. A taxi idled near the end of the boardwalk, and Ethan flagged it down before it could pull away, both of them dripping seawater onto the back seat, as the driver shot them an alarmed look in the rearview mirror and asked no questions, simply pulling out into traffic the moment Ethan gave the hospital's address, in a voice still rough from the water and the cold. The city blurred past the windows, streetlights smearing gold against the wet glass, and Laura kept hold of his hand the entire way, feeling it tremble faintly against hers, not from the cold anymore but from something deeper, the particular helplessness of racing toward a hospital, with no information except how bad and an address. "Tell me about him," she said quietly, partly to fill the silence and partly because she sensed he needed somewhere to put his fear that was not simply staring out the window watching the minutes disappear. "Your father. I've heard so much about Owen tonight. I don't think I've ever heard you talk about your dad." "He's stubborn," Ethan said, a small, unsteady laugh escaping him despite everything. "Builds furniture in his garage even though his doctor told him to stop lifting heavy things years ago. Calls me every Sunday at exactly the same time, like clockwork, and gets offended if I don't pick up on the second ring. After Owen died, he stopped talking about him completely. Like if he didn't say the name out loud, the loss couldn't get any bigger than it already was." He pressed his free hand flat against his chest, as if trying to physically hold something in place. "I always thought I had more time to fix things with him, more time to figure out how to talk about Owen without it breaking both of us. I don't know why I keep assuming I have time for these conversations. Nobody has ever actually promised me that." Laura tightened her grip on his hand and said nothing, because there was nothing useful to say to that, only the quiet, steady pressure of her fingers laced through his, carrying him the rest of the way toward whatever waited inside the hospital doors. The taxi pulled up to the emergency entrance 12 minutes later, its tires hissing against the wet pavement, and Ethan was out of the door before it had fully stopped, Laura close behind him, both of them still soaked and shivering, running together through the sliding glass doors into the bright, sterile light of the waiting room, toward whatever came next. The waiting room smelled like antiseptic and bad coffee, the lights too bright after the gray softness of the storm outside, and Ethan's mother rose from a row of plastic chairs the moment she saw him, her face crumpling with relief at the sight of her son even soaked and shivering, and clearly in no state to be comforting anyone else. "They've stabilized him," she said, pulling Ethan into a tight hug before he could ask. It wasn't a full heart attack. The doctor called it a serious cardiac event. Something about a blocked artery they're going to need to address properly once he's strong enough for the procedure. But he's awake. He's talking. He's already complaining about the hospital food, which your father considers a full recovery in itself. Ethan let out a breath that seemed to empty him completely, his shoulders dropping, the tension that had carried him through the taxi ride finally loosening enough for Laura to see, for the first time all night, just how exhausted he actually was underneath it. His mother noticed Laura then, taking in her soaked clothes and tangled hair with open curiosity, and Ethan made the introduction quickly, briefly, his hand finding Laura's without seeming to think about it. This is Laura. He paused, the word catching somewhere between old habits and new honesty. She's the woman I love. I should have introduced you to a long time ago. His mother's eyebrows rose, surprise and something gentler moving across her face in quick succession. But the hospital corridor was not the place for that conversation, and she simply reached out and squeezed Laura's hand once, warmly, before turning back to Ethan, with the practical urgency of a mother managing a crisis. He's been asking for you, she said. Go, I'll wait here with her. Ethan disappeared down the corridor, and Laura sat with his mother in the hard plastic chairs, the two of them making small, careful conversation about nothing important, the kind of talk people use to hold space open until the real conversation has room to happen. Laura learned that his father's name was Walter, that he had built the kitchen table in their house with his own hands the year Ethan was born, that he had not said Owen's name out loud in almost 3 years, not once, not even at family dinners where his absence sat at the table like an extra, uninvited guest. You're the reason he's been different the last couple of years, his mother said suddenly, watching the corridor where Ethan had disappeared, lighter, somehow. Even when I could tell he was carrying something he wasn't telling us, I used to wonder who put that particular look on his face when his phone buzzed at dinner. Now I know. I didn't know any of that was happening. Not really. Not until tonight. That doesn't surprise me. Ethan has always been the kind of person who carries things quietly, even the good things, like he's afraid naming them out loud might make them disappear. She reached over and patted Laura's hand, an oddly maternal gesture for a woman she had known less than an hour. Whatever happened between you two tonight, I'm glad it happened before Walter scared the rest of us half to death. Sometimes it takes something terrible to remind a family how much time they've been wasting being careful with each other. 20 minutes later, Ethan returned, his eyes red-rimmed in a way that had nothing to do with the seawater still drying in his hair. Can I steal her for a minute? He asked his mother, and without waiting for an answer, he reached for Laura's hand and led her down the hallway, away from the waiting room noise, toward a quiet alcove near a window that looked out over the hospital parking lot, rain still falling thin and steady beyond the glass. He's going to be okay, Ethan said, his voice thick. The doctors are confident. He needs a procedure, some recovery time, but he's going to be okay. I'm so glad. He said something to me in there. Ethan leaned back against the wall, looking suddenly younger than Laura had ever seen him, stripped down by exhaustion and relief into something rawer and more honest than his usual careful composure. He said he saw the way I looked at you in the hallway when they wheeled him past on the gurney, even half out of it from the pain medication. And he asked me, point blank, why I was wasting time standing in a hospital corridor when there was clearly a woman waiting on the other side of it for an answer. Your father said that, drugged and recovering from a cardiac event. My father has never once been too drugged to have an opinion. A small, tired laugh escaped him. He told me Owen would be furious with me, not for falling in love, for taking 3 years to do something about it because I was too busy trying to be perfect for everyone who was already gone instead of being honest with the people who were still here. He said grief doesn't ask you to stop living, it just asks you to carry it while you do. Ethan's voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, and he pressed the heel of his hand briefly against his eyes before continuing. He told me to stop wasting whatever time I had left being careful, because careful had already cost me 2 years with you, and he wasn't interested in watching me lose anymore. What else did he say? Ethan was quiet for a moment, gathering the words. He said Owen used to call him every Sunday too, before the accident, same time, same way I do now, and that some part of him had started treating my calls like a replacement, like if he held on to that ritual tightly enough, it would soften the fact that one of his sons wasn't going to call anymore. He said he never told me that, because saying it felt like admitting Owen was actually gone instead of just away somewhere, and admitting that out loud felt like the last door closing. Ethan swallowed hard. He apologized to me. My father, lying in a hospital bed with tubes in his arm, apologized for never once asking me how I was doing in 3 years, because he was too afraid of what honest grief might sound like coming from both of us at the same time. That's an enormous thing for him to say. It is, and I think it's the first time since Owen died that anyone in my family has actually said any of it out loud instead of just managing around the edges of it. He held my hand and told me he didn't want to die, having never told me he was proud of how I tried to hold everyone together, even though he also wished, more than anything, that I had let myself fall apart a little along the way, instead of carrying it all so quietly. Ethan looked down at Laura's hand, still wrapped in his. He said the kindest thing I could do for Owen's memory now wasn't more careful loyalty. It was actually living, loudly, visibly, the way Owen always did before the accident took that chance away from him. Laura reached up and brushed a strand of damp hair back from his forehead, her hand lingering against his face, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything at all, the hospital humming quietly around them, rain tapping steady against the window glass. "What time is it?" she asked finally. Ethan checked his phone, and something in his expression shifted, the easy relief of the last few minutes giving way to a different kind of urgency. 4 in the morning. Your flight is at 7:15. The number landed between them with unexpected weight. 3 hours. 3 hours between the answer she had finally gotten and the plane that was still, regardless of everything that had happened, going to take her across an ocean, toward a job she had worked hard for and genuinely wanted, long before any of this had complicated the wanting. "I don't want you to give up Singapore," Ethan said quietly, watching her face. "I need you to know that first, before we talk about anything else. You earned that job. You wanted it before any of this happened, and I am not going to be the reason you let it go, especially not after everything that's happened tonight that proves exactly how much can change in a single day when people stop being careful." "You're not asking me to stay?" "I want to ask you to stay so badly I can barely stand here and not say it, but asking you to give up something you worked for, the morning after I finally found the courage to stop hiding how I feel, would just be trading one kind of cowardice for another. I'm done doing that." He took both of her hands in his thumbs tracing slow, steady circles against her knuckles. "Go to Singapore. Take the job. Build the life you set out to build. I'll be here when you land, on a video call, at 3 in the morning my time if that's what it takes. I'll fly out the first chance I get once my father is stable enough that I'm not needed here every day. We'll figure out the distance the same way we figured out 2 years of almost, one honest conversation at a time." That's a lot of distance to ask 2 people to manage. It is, but I spent 3 years managing a much harder distance, the kind where I was standing right next to you and still couldn't close it. An ocean feels almost simple by comparison. Laura laughed, a startled, wet sound caught somewhere between a sob and genuine joy, and she pulled him down into a kiss that tasted faintly of salt water and hospital coffee, and 2 years of finally arriving somewhere they had both been circling the entire time. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathless, the window beside them had begun to lighten faintly with the first gray suggestion of dawn. "We need to go," Laura said, "if I'm going to make this flight." "I know. Your father is sleeping and surrounded by people who love him and would absolutely tell me to get out of this hospital and drive you to the airport if he knew I was even considering doing anything else." Ethan pulled his phone out and called for a car, already steering her gently back down the corridor toward the exit. The drive to the airport passed in a blur of empty pre-dawn streets and traffic lights blinking yellow at intersections with no one else around to obey them, the city quiet in the particular way cities only get in the hour before sunrise, holding its breath between one day and the next. Laura kept Ethan's hand in hers the entire way, watching the terminal signs grow closer, feeling the strange, suspended calm of someone who has finally said the hardest thing out loud and survived hearing the answer. They reached the terminal with 40 minutes to spare. Ethan walked her as far as security allowed, both of them moving slower than they needed to, neither willing to be the one who rushed the goodbye. 2 years of almost, Laura said, standing at the edge of the security line, her boarding pass already in hand. "I never thought it would end with both of us soaking wet in a hospital hallway at 4 in the morning. I never thought it would end with me jumping into the ocean to save a stranger's kid, and somehow that turned out to be the easy part of the day. You're going to call me the second you land back home. I'm going to call you so often you'll get tired of hearing my voice. I don't think that's possible. We're about to find out. A voice crackled over the terminal speakers, calling the early boarding group for her flight, and Laura felt the words land in her chest with a strange, suspended weight. The sound of a clock she had been racing against for 2 full days, finally, quietly, running out. I keep thinking about all the versions of last night where this went differently, she said, where you never said anything. And I got on a plane this morning with the question still sitting unanswered between us, and we both just let 2 years of almost turn into forever. That version doesn't get to exist anymore. I made sure of that, even if it took nearly drowning and a hospital and an entire ocean of fear to get me there. Worth it? More than worth it. I'd do the whole impossible day over again exactly the same way if it ended here, with you actually believing me. The line shifted forward, and Laura took 1 step toward it before turning back, catching his face in both hands and kissing him once more, slow and certain, nothing rushed or uncertain left in it at all. You can refuse me, she said quietly, pulling back just far enough to look at him properly. You always could have. I want you to know that the question was never really about whether you had the right to say no. It was about whether you'd finally let yourself tell me the truth, whatever it turned out to be. I know, and the truth is, I can't. I never could. I just needed an entire ocean of fear to finally get out of my own way long enough to say so. She smiled, stepped back into the line, and did not look away from him until the security gate finally swallowed her from view, her hand lifting once in a small, certain wave that he answered with one of his own. Ethan stood at the window overlooking the runway for a long time after her plane pulled back from the gate, watching it taxi out into the gray morning light, lifting finally into a sky still streaked with the last of the night's clouds, carrying her toward a life she had earned on her own, and a future that now, somehow, against every careful, fearful instinct that had cost him 2 years, included him too. His phone buzzed as the plane disappeared from view. A message from Laura, sent the moment the seatbelt sign allowed it. Already counting the hours until you fly out here. Don't make me wait 2 years for this one. Ethan smiled, typed his reply with hands that had finally, completely, stopped shaking, and walked back out into the bright, ordinary morning to go be the kind of son and the kind of man he had spent 3 years too afraid to become. 3 months later, Ethan stepped off a plane in Singapore for the first time, his shoulders stiff from the long flight, his eyes scanning the crowded arrivals hall with the particular nervousness of a man who had spent 90 days proving, 1 phone call and 1 late-night message at a time, that distance had not been the obstacle he once feared it would be. His father was home from the hospital by then, recovering well, slowly relearning how to say his older son's name out loud at the dinner table without flinching, a small, steady kind of healing that had quietly reshaped the whole family in the months since the cardiac scare. Claire had moved 2 states away to be near her sister, sending occasional messages that read less like grief now and more like someone genuinely starting over. Laura found him before he found her, weaving through the crowd in a sundress that had no business existing anywhere near the city he had left behind, her hair longer than it had been at the airport gate, her face breaking into the kind of smile that made the whole long flight feel instantly, completely worth it. You're late, she said, though they both knew the flight had landed early. 2 years late by my count. I'm trying to make up for lost time. She laughed and pulled him into a hug that lasted considerably longer than the average airport reunion, neither of them in any hurry to let go, and somewhere behind them the arrivals board flickered through its usual list of cities and gates and departure times, utterly indifferent to the fact that, for these 2 people at least, the waiting had finally, completely come to an end.